Joining me right now is the former chairman and CEO of the New York Stock Exchange, Dick Grasso. Dick, it's great to have you this morning. Thanks very much for being with me. Good to see you, Dick. And you know, you oversaw the New York Stock Exchange after 9/11 when we had such upset, but it was a very different situation there because as a country we were targeted. Now we've got haves and have-nots, and we've got looters reacting to what's happened to an innocent black man. How will this affect economic recovery amid this pandemic, in your view, Dick?
Well, Maria, it's great to be with you, and you're very right. This is the absolute opposite of 9/11. 9/11, the country came together to respond to a threat from a really horrific attack on our nation. Today, we are more in a comparable situation to 1968, the rioting in the streets preceding the election in November of that year. I think the tragedy and the very deep tragedy of the death of George Floyd, and you know, our hearts go out to his family and to all of those who feel that there is a terrible need and a pressing need for judicial reform in this country. The peaceful demonstrators are being overshadowed by these rioters and looters and, you know, the so-called, you know, anti-establishment Antifa. It's going to affect our economic recovery. You know, we're just coming out of the coronavirus shutdown, and stores and particularly, you know, small businesses in this country, which are, you know, so vital to our economic performance. Remember, Maria, 2/3 of our GDP is consumption. We need the streets to be safe and clean so that people can come out again and enjoy restaurants and theaters and retailing. And until we get the anarchists off the streets, we're not going to have that. So we're going to see a little bit of a delay in the economic backswing that I know is coming. This country was very successful in rising from the riots of '68, and we're going to be successful in rising from these riots. And I believe the peaceful protesters who seek justice for Mr. Floyd and his family will be satisfied that judicial reform and justice is coming. But we have got to depend upon the mayors and the governors, as the president has said, to get out there with their local resources, policing, and backed up by National Guard efforts, and if need be, U.S. Army efforts to clear the streets of Antifa and those who are overshadowing all that should be done peacefully. You know, protest is part of the American way of life, but rioting and looting and anarchy is not, and that's got to stop.
Right. That's exactly right, Dick. You're spot on, and we need to make sure the rule of law is in place. Let me ask you about the rule of law of a different sort, and that's this idea of delisting Chinese companies on the New York Stock Exchange and on the NASDAQ if they don't follow the accounting rules. The Senate passed a bill earlier this month that would require companies to prove they are not controlled by a foreign government and that they can meet U.S. accounting standards, threatening some of Beijing's largest listings in the United States. Some exchanges are already cracking down, like the NASDAQ, planning to delist Luckin Coffee after it allegedly fabricated transactions. Dick, I remember being with you all of those years when you were running the New York Stock Exchange. You would get on a plane and fly across the world to meet with companies, to explain the democracy process in America and capitalism, to come list their stock on the New York Stock Exchange. You were incredibly effective in so many countries getting those international listings. What do you say now about those Chinese companies that are listed that don't follow accounting rules? And now the government's cracking down, saying, look, we don't want any company that's not going to follow our standards. And we're also seeing China in a different light. So we're going to pull money from those companies that are actually building weapons for the Chinese military.
Well, I think you have to separate a few of the very vital questions that you asked, Maria. First and foremost, for a non-U.S. company, be they Chinese or from whatever part of the world, to be introduced into the American markets, and particularly to be listed on the premier exchange, the New York Stock Exchange, they must meet U.S. accounting GAAP standards. If they don't, or if they do and then fail to continue to meet those standards, quite rightly, we should throw them off the exchange. So I applaud the action of the Congress, but remember, Maria, before a company is admitted to the U.S. markets, whether it's the New York Stock Exchange or NASDAQ, they must meet U.S. generally accepted accounting principles. Now, if they don't, then you simply deny access. As far as continuing, or if you look at the Luckin situation, Luckin was a fraud. No worse or no different, if you will, than WorldCom or some of the other frauds that we've seen in the United States. And quite justifiably, you take a company like that and you throw it off the exchange. You deny access to the world's deepest capital market, the broadest base of investors, and that's why companies come here. You know, in the time frame that you mentioned, when I was recruiting companies from the world market, companies sought capital. Companies sought access to a broad base of investors. They sought opportunity to do strategic partnering with U.S. companies. All of those attributes are still, and perhaps even more so, present today. So there is a magnetism to coming to the United States, but there is also a cost.
There sure is.
U.S. investors must be protected, and that's what the Congress is dealing with, and that's what the SEC quite effectively is dealing with. And I know the markets, whether it's the New York Stock Exchange or the NASDAQ, feel as I do. You either meet our standards or you're denied access.
Yeah, well, listen, they got a pass for so long. Dick, real quick on this, we're running out of time, but what kind of a cost will this represent, or a loss of business does this represent from the New York and NASDAQ? If these companies do, in fact, ultimately get pulled, isn't that a big piece of business that they lose? I recognize that that's the right thing to do. They're not following the law, but characterize the piece of business that it is.
Well, it's going to be a significant piece of business, but I think more so would be, were they not to take the actions that are necessary, the loss of investor confidence, the loss of U.S. participation in our markets is far greater. So I think it's important that American investors trust NASDAQ and the New York Stock Exchange to do the right thing here, even though in the short term it may cost them some business. In the long term, it enhances the brands of those two great markets and will enjoy the continued participation of worldwide investors.
All right. We will leave it there. Dick, it's always a pleasure to see you. Love having you this morning, Dick. Thanks so much.
Nice to be with you, Maria.